So now let's look at our conditional loan approval. This is certainly something that this conditional loan approval, it's something that a lot of people are confused about. It's something that a lot of lenders don't necessarily do or fully understand at times. But let's look at what the contract actually says so you know how this works. So we go back to our financing addenda. And in paragraph 1A, and again, this is the same for all the different type of addenda. Paragraph 1, we get to the bottom of the main part of paragraph 1, and we see this big bold line, within 5 days from the time reference date, the buyer shall either. Remember B we looked at just a minute ago that said the loan terms are unsatisfactory. A right here says, if we're not going to do that, if we're going to say the loan terms are fine, so within 5 days of the time reference date, the buyer's going to make application for the loan, right? So they're going to apply for the loan and they're going to do all the things that they need to. They're going to proceed diligently to try to get that loan. It also says, as we look at this in a little more detail in the bold part here, the buyer's supposed to pay the initial loan fees, including property appraisal, credit report fees, all those kinds of things, and then instruct the lender to issue a statement of conditional loan approval, not a final loan commitment, just conditional loan approval. And here's what it's supposed to have in it. It's supposed to have in it that, look, we've looked at the buyer's creditworthiness. The buyer's paid their initial fees. The appraisal's been ordered. And the buyer does not have to sell their current house to buy this one unless we have an addenda that says otherwise. So the buyer might have to sell their current house, which would be our contingency contracts that we see quite frequently now. But it's supposed to have these 4 things in it, right? Creditworthiness, processing fees, appraisal, buyer doesn't have to sell their current house. And that's supposed to be delivered to the seller right here, right? So instruct the lender to issue a conditional loan approval letter within 10 days of the time reference date. So this gets a little convoluted, right? Within 5 days of the time reference date, make application, and then within 10 days of the time reference date, have the lender create a conditional loan approval letter that covers these 4 things. And of course, this is a blank here, so you could give longer, but by default, it's 10 days. And in my experience, most people tend to leave it blank, although you certainly wouldn't have to, but that's what it says here. So we're going to have to go into a little more detail about this conditional loan approval. This is what's supposed to be in it and when it's supposed to be delivered from the buyer to the seller prepared by the lender, okay? So what if the buyer doesn't? And this is something that people get a little confused on because this is kind of hidden, right? The way that this addenda is set out, it's a little bit confusing. So let's kind of back up and talk about this for a second. So buyer makes application. Within 10 days of the time reference date, they're supposed to have a conditional loan approval letter, right? And what happens if a buyer has an obligation, or a seller for that matter, but if a buyer has an obligation to do something and they don't do it? Well, sometimes that might be a breach of the contract, right? I have an obligation to do this thing. I didn't do it, so I'm in breach of the contract. Or it could be something like I've lost the right to do something. So I didn't do my inspections on time. Well, now I've lost the right to do them. It's not a breach of contract. It just means I've waived my right to do that thing. Well, in this case, we've got, if we don't have our conditional loan approval letter on time, and that's in that paragraph 1A, and then it says 1B is I don't like the loan terms, I can terminate. And just below that is this extra paragraph that gives us the so what if the buyer doesn't provide the conditional loan approval, okay? So again, 1A, make application, give the loan approval, and down below B, it has this right here. So if within that time period above, that 10 days or whatever it's set at in that blank, a written statement of loan approval is not delivered, then the seller can give notice of their intent to cancel the contract. Okay, so buyer doesn't give it 10 days, comes and goes. The seller says, well, here's my notice to you, buyer. I intend to terminate this contract if you don't give me the letter of conditional loan approval. And in red here, it says the contract shall terminate upon the 4th day following delivery. So the way that would work is down here, this is on that notice of cancellation form that OREC has. The seller would check the box that as provided in the financing supplement, the seller was not provided with the loan approval. So I'd give that. I would give notice. And that's this right up here. That's the seller's notice of intent to cancel. And then we would start the clock on 4 days running. And if we get to day 4 and day 4 passes and the buyer still hasn't delivered it, then the contract terminates. But this last sentence, if the buyer does deliver that conditional loan approval, it's late, right? They should have done it in those 10 days of the time reference date. But if it's late, they can still keep the contract together. The contract wouldn't bust. So we have to remember this timeline, exactly how this works, right? So how does that work? Let's look at it one more time. Paragraph 1A, within 5 days of the time reference date, the buyer makes application for the loan. And then within 10 days of the time reference date, instruct the lender to provide the conditional loan approval letter. If they don't, then the seller can choose to, they don't have to, but they can give notice to the buyer and say, look, I am intending to cancel this contract if you don't give me a conditional loan approval letter. Then the buyer's got 4 days. And if they deliver it in those 4 days, the contract stays together. If they don't, the contract busts and it terminates. So understand how that process works. Again, the seller doesn't have to ask for the conditional loan approval letter. It's very common that buyers don't provide it. And it's very common that the sellers don't ask for it, but they can. The buyer should provide it and the seller can ask for it. And that's how that process works if that becomes necessary.